I want to start a brand new series with you. I'm so glad that you're here. If you're watching at home, watching online, we're glad that you're joining us at Life Church today. Just listening to kind of what's going on in our world today, what's going on in our community, in our county, in our country, in our city. I wanted to address the whole topic of fear and the fear that I think a lot of people in the world are feeling today. And so that's where I want to go for the next couple of weeks. We just talk about different places in our life where we feel fear. Now, I could ask you what you're afraid of, and some of you would admit you're afraid of some things, afraid of spiders, maybe afraid of snakes, afraid of mice. If you're a teenager, especially a teenage boy, you're not afraid of anything, right? All teenage guys, yeah, you with me? Right? You're not afraid of anything. And what we're afraid of changes through the years. I don't know if you were ever like this when you were a kid, laying in bed at night, and you were almost certain that something was underneath your bed. It wasn't there earlier in the day, but it was there now. And you dare not even get your fingers close to the edge of the bed. Anybody with me on that whole thing? All right, there was something underneath your bed. You could feel it. It was just there. You just knew in your mind. Or it wasn't under your bed. It was in your closet. Now, it might have been your brother that was in your closet, and they're a jerk, and they should just get out of there, right? But anyway, something paralyzed you with fear as a kid as you laid there in bed. And what we're afraid of changes through our life. When you're a kid, you might be afraid of what's under the bed. When you're a teenager, you're not afraid of anything except that you might not get a date, right? She might not say yes. He might not ask me out. When you're in your 20s, your fear might be that I'm never getting married. All right, that's a fear for people. It might be for some of you the loss of a job. It might be a diagnosis that you receive. For some of you right now, what's paralyzing you with fear is perhaps the price of oil. I checked it Friday morning, $18.75 for North Dakota Sweet. And that's bothersome to some people, isn't it? For some of you, you turn on your TV sets and you watch the news, you see what's going on in the world today, and that bothers you, doesn't it? You see things, you hear words like ISIS. When I was a kid growing up, ISIS was what Wonder Woman said when she wanted to turn into... You don't remember that, do you? Okay, all right, there was no such thing as Wonder Woman. I didn't watch it. Just kidding. All right. So, but that bothers some of you. You're wondering about the elections and things that are going to go on in our elections. You're wondering what's going to happen. What will change for me? And there's all kinds of things that can grip us for fear sometimes. We're not afraid of. We're not sure what's going to happen, and we feel this anxiety within our bodies. You know what that feeling is like. The dry throat, the pit. Your stomach just feels this emptiness and this tightening. Your heart beats a little faster. Palms get sweaty. Fear is a motivator that motivates us to make decisions that we would probably never otherwise make. Instead of strategizing, we compromise. Instead of making a plan, we respond to our circumstances with panic. It affects our relationships. It affects our money. It affects our marriages. It affects the decisions that we make about our futures. And fear, you understand, is one of the most contagious emotions that humans can feel. Some years back, my family and I took a vacation out to Washington, D.C. We actually stayed in Fairfax County, Virginia. We're 20, 30 minutes outside of the D.C. area. And to get in there, we had to ride a metro. We rode the train to get in there, the subway. And we're at this nice hotel, and they didn't have shuttle service to the metro station, but they had shuttle service for free to the shopping mall. At the shopping mall, you could now take a metro bus to the metro station. And so we did that. We made arrangements. We wanted to make sure we were on the right bus to get to where we wanted to go. And we got to the mall. We got on a bus. We got to the metro station. We got on the metro. We rode the metro in. And you're seeing when you get to all these metro stops, you're stopping at this station. And it was just a great time getting into Washington, D.C. Had an amazing time. You come up out of the subway station, and there you are right in the midst of the Capitol grounds. It's really phenomenal. We had a wonderful day. And then we got back. We got back to the metro station back in Fairfax County, Virginia. It's long since dark. It's late at night, and we're looking at this massive chart in the metro station trying to figure out what bus number we want to get on to get to where we needed to go. go, and we were pretty sure that we found our bus, and this bus pulled in, and we get on the bus, and we started riding the bus, and as we're looking out the bus window, our surroundings looked familiar for about 5 minutes. And then nothing looked familiar. We're just riding the bus. We're having a great bus ride. You know, people getting on the bus and off the bus, on the bus and off the bus. And pretty soon we're looking now at really tall buildings, and we didn't recognize any of these buildings. And this woman that was driving the bus turned around, and Robin and Nathan and me are the only 3 on the bus. And she turns around and looks at us and said, "This is the end of the line." In other words, get off my bus. We're done. This is the end of the route. And I'm realizing in that moment, I need to make a decision to overcome even the little bit of anxiety I felt because I didn't know where we were. And I said to my wife and son as we got off the bus, well, this is an adventure. This is going to be kind of fun. We're going to explore some new territory. And I could see by the look in her eyes, she was not having the same emotional feeling that I was. And fortunately for us, the bus dropped us off right at the metro station. We went down these steps. We're at a metro station. And fortunately, it was one that we had passed through earlier on the metro. And so we jumped on the metro and headed back to the metro station and took a taxi to our hotel. So I'm just saying, you know, but fear can be so contagious. But we like fear when we're in control. Nothing like a good roller coaster, is there? Strap me in. Let's have a great time. I know that I'm safe, and there's an element of fear. Your anxiety rises as you stand in line, and you can see this coaster going all around you, and there's an element of fear, but you know that you're going to be safe. So you like that fear because it's a controlled fear. For some of you, you like watching a movie that creates this anxiety and this fear. You're in control. You can shut it off. You can leave the room. You can bury your face in a pillow. You can do whatever. It's a controlled environment, but it's the fear that we can't control that creates a fear within us that we can't control. Now, how do you confront that fear? Fortunately for us, the Word of God addresses this. I read this morning no less than 9 times in the Gospels. Jesus says, don't be afraid. Fear is a common emotion all of us feel. We're going to read something together. If you brought a Bible, we turned the book of Proverbs today. The book of Proverbs, you probably know some of the verses that we're going to read. If you brought a device, whatever it is, the book of Proverbs is called a poetical book. It's found in the Old Testament part of your Bible. And a guy named Solomon wrote most of this. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. God blessed him with incredible wisdom. It is a practical book. It has so many practical answers. And what we're going to read today is certainly no different. It has practical answers that addresses the issue of fear. So if you found Proverbs, we're going to begin right away in verse number 1. Look how Solomon starts this part of his book. He says, look, my child. And I like the fact that it just stops right there and says, my child. In other words, I'm the teacher and you're the student, and I want you to understand something. And even in the midst of those moments of fear, it doesn't matter. Listen to me, if you're young today, it doesn't matter that your parents are adults and they've grown up and experienced things. They still get just as afraid as you do sometimes. Regardless of our age, regardless of life experience, there are things that come into our life that we feel like a little child when we are afraid. And he says, my child, he says, never, never, never forget the things that I have taught you. Store my commands in your heart. In other words, this goes beyond just head knowledge. I want you to take this right in here. I want this to become a part of who you are. Implement this in your life, and you'll see the results and the payoff for it. He says in verse number 2, if you do this, you will live many years and your life will be satisfying. And let's just be honest, isn't that what all of us want? Isn't it true that all of us want to have many years of satisfying life? Isn't it true that we all want to live a long life with the fewest number of bumps in it as we can possibly have? Isn't it true that that's what we all desire? You know, because fear really is all about self-preservation. I don't know if you thought about that very much, but if you're fearful and you're afraid of something happening, you're thinking about self-preservation. You want to control your environment because the fear is that you're going to lose something. You want to keep it. So you want to control it. You want to hold it in your fist. But fear has to deal with self-preservation. You want to preserve normalcy in your life. Let's make it as smooth and just free as problems as we possibly can. I don't want my marriage to shift or change. I don't want my health to shift or change. I want enough money. I want my money situation to be stable. I want my spouse to be happy. I want my children to be healthy. I want a long life with no problems in it. And humanly speaking, we will do everything we can to try to control that so that we don't encounter those kinds of bumps and problems in life. And then it's almost like the writer really knows what we're thinking. He says, look, I know that you want the satisfying life with many years. It's not found in a vitamin pill. Here's how you do that. In verse number 5, you know this verse. Look what he says in verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Now, I know what's in your heart. A little bit. Certainly God knows. Jesus said, you can tell where a person's heart is because it's connected with their treasure. Some people, their treasure is their financial portfolio. The treasure is the royalty checks that were coming in. For some people, their treasure is their children. Everything's about the children. We run to their practices. We go to their events. And everything's always all about the kids. And so that's where your treasure is. For some of you, your treasure is in the person that you're living with or married to. That if anything would happen to them, my life would absolutely fall apart. For some of you, your treasure is your job, because in your job, that's where you find your identity. And if you lost your job, you'd lose your identity. And so that's where your treasure is, because that's where your heart is. And the writer of Proverbs says, those are the places where you need to trust God. Because you know what? People die. Jobs end. Economy changes. World events change. Circumstances change. The world's always in a constant state of flux. It's never the same, but there's one person that stays the same all the time, and that's God. So we put our trust in the Lord. He says, don't depend on your own understanding. And he throws that in there, I believe, because he knows that that's what we do. We depend on our own understanding. Well, let me tell you what I did. Let me tell you the book I read. Let me tell you about the seminar I've been to. Let me tell you about what I know. Let me tell you about what I can do. And here's the pushback for us, though, isn't it? I don't know where you're at in a relationship with God. Maybe you just came here today because somebody promised you lunch. Maybe you just heard that I was good looking. I don't know why you're here today, but here's the pushback, isn't it? Here's the pushback. Pastor, look. You want me to trust a God whom I've never seen and you've never seen, with the stuff in my life that is before my eyes all the time. Yeah, pretty much. Because what are your options? What are your options? Trust means you release control. This is how we tend to live our life. And this is how God says, I want you to live your life. You can try to control your relationship. You can try to control your marriage. You can try to control your money. You can try to control your environment. But here's what I've learned. Whatever you control, you tend to kill. But when we trust things to God, God is the God that brings life. We want to depend on our own understanding. And then almost like Solomon can read our mind, look what he says in verse number 6. Seek his will. You've been seeking your will. You've been doing what you want to do. You've been trying to figure this out on your own. You've been trying to figure this out. You've been laying your head on the pillow at night and you're rationalizing this. You're thinking this through and you got a plan. You haven't prayed about it. You've worried about it. You've fretted about it. You've stewed about it. You've been angry about it, but you haven't sought God's will in any of this. He says, seek first his will in all that you do. That means we pray about things. We seek the face of God in things. We say, Lord, I want what you want in this situation, not what I want. And he will show you which path to take. And isn't it seeking the will of God? Isn't that usually the last option for us? And what this verse is saying is, you know what? You just seek God until God's option is the only option and you've eliminated all other options. You seek His will. God, what do you want to do with this? And isn't it true that isn't it true that we all want to know what the will of God is? What path am I supposed to take? And we try to figure this out. We try to rationalize it. We try to use our human intellect in this whole thing without going to God and even praying about any of it. He says, look, you got to eliminate all the options until God's way is the only options, and then He'll show you. And trusting God, you understand this, when we start to trust God, it begins to remove the monsters that live under our beds. Well, that's God's part. We've got a part in all of this too. And look at verse 21. Verse 21 says, my child, again he addresses his children, my child, don't lose sight of common sense and discernment. Hang on to them. You know what? If you watch the lives of people and you observe humanity long enough, you know what you begin to discover? Common sense isn't very common. You've looked at people's lives, haven't you, and said, what were they thinking? And then you came to the conclusion, they weren't thinking. If they would have used some common sense. Of course, you always use common sense and discernment, don't you? That's why you bought the boat. It just made sense at the time, right? But he says use common sense and discernment. Now, rationally, as a kid laying in bed, when you rationalize this whole thing, you know there's no monster under the bed, don't you? You know there's no monster in the closet, don't you? Common sense and discernment tell you that. But more often we're given to emotion than we are to reality. No matter how things might seem, it doesn't mean that's the way things are. Verse 23 says, discernment and common sense, you know what they do? They keep you safe on your way and your feet will not stumble. In other words, look, there's things that God will do if you trust God. There's a lot of stuff God is going to do, but let's just be honest. Sometimes God's asking us to use a little bit of common sense and wisdom about things. And when we use common sense about things, God meets us at that place. Common sense says, I can't eat at a fast food restaurant 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, and not be unstained by that. That's just common sense. Common sense says, you know what? If I get a little bit of extra money, I might want to use the extra money for God's work and maybe then put some away for a rainy day. It took me a long time to get that. I'm a spender. I don't know when it happened, but I became a spender. I was a saver as a little kid, then I became a spender. It's the classic case. You got a little money burning a hole in your pocket. And then you become an adult and realize, you know what? I could have used some of that money. Common sense is, well, you have a little bit extra, why not put it away? They keep you safe. Now, if we start to use little common sense and discernment about things, look at the result in verse 24. You can go to bed without fear. And you'll lie down and sleep soundly. You know what? If instead of panicking, we would plan. Instead of compromise, we would strategize. We can lay our head on the pillow at night and feel a peace about things. And isn't that what you want in the midst of the environment that we're facing right now in the city of Williston, Williams County, North Dakota, even in the nation as we look on a global scale? Isn't it true that when we lay our heads on the pillow at night, we all want to know that when we wake up tomorrow morning, it's going to be as good as it can possibly be because I've done all that I can do. The rest is up to God, and I trust Him to take care of the rest, and I can't do anything about the stuff I can't control anyway. Isn't it true that we all want to feel that kind of peace? I used to lay in bed at night before coming to faith in Christ, thinking about how He's going to fix all my financial problems, relational problems. I lost sleep over it. But when I turned my life over to Christ and started to trust Him and be obedient to His precepts and His plans and His principles, life looked a little different. Verse 25 says, you need not be afraid of sudden disaster or the destruction that comes upon the wicked. In other words, the payoff for trust, the payoff for common sense and discernment is a peace and sense of well-being inside of all of our hearts. And isn't it true that that's what all of us want? And then I love the way he concludes this section with what he says in verse number 26. Look what he says. For the Lord is your security. Isn't it true? Isn't it true that for some of you, when you started getting lease checks or royalty checks, or suddenly when you got this incredible job that paid more than you'd ever seen before, isn't it true that for a moment you kind of felt a little more secure, didn't you? But then there's always this nagging thing in the back of your mind. What if I lost my job? Or what if those checks ended? Or what if I still don't have enough money to last me for the rest of my life? And we're always this great quest that I'll have security when I have enough. Here's the question. How do you know when that's going to be? Because you and I don't know when we're going to die. Wouldn't it be great if we started trusting God before we had to? Because here's what's going to happen. And maybe this has happened for your life. The offering bag goes around on Sunday morning, and that's all great. And we'll maybe throw in a little bit. It goes around, that's great. Throw in a little bit. Or we just, it's like, I love church. I just hate that offering time. You know, I just hate that whole, because I feel guilty every time that thing goes by. And then tragedy strikes. There's a diagnosis. You lost your job. The family's falling apart. Stock market tanked. The royalty checks are just a fraction of what they used to be. And then there's a sense of panic inside of all of us. It's like, oh God, no, what should I do? What should I do? Oh God, I trust you with my finances. I trust you with my children. Oh God, I trust you with my marriage. And God's going, you know what? I'm glad you do, but you should have done that before you had to. We say, God, I trust you with my heart. Well, what other options do you have? He's the one that determines whether or not you breathe. I mean, right? What would your life feel like today if right now, instead of worrying, we started trusting? What do you think? What do you think your marriage would maybe look like if instead of trying to control your spouse and lay in bed at night thinking, what would I ever do if they died or weren't here? What if we just said, God, thank you for letting me be a steward of my wife's heart. I trust her to you because, Lord, I have no other options. I don't want to control her. I want to love her. What if we said, God, my children are on loan from you. God, help me be the best steward of my child's heart in life. Because Mom and Dad, all of us, our children are on loan to us from God. We get a few short years with them, and then we send them off, and somebody else marries them, and they ask us for money. That's just the way life is, isn't it? What if we said, God, I give my children to you. I cannot possess them. I'm simply a steward over their hearts. What if we said, God, thank you so much for the resources of income you've given me. I'm so thankful for my job. I'm so glad I have a job. God, thank you for the abundance you've blessed me with. Lord, help me be a good steward with your resources. And here's the incredible thing. We get the choice to do that. We get the choice to do that. We can do that anytime. But what we tend to do, let's just be honest, what we tend to do is human beings, we tend to make those decisions and pray those prayers only when the rug has been yanked out from under our feet. Oh God, I trust you. Yeah, I know. But why didn't you start a while ago? Because I wanted you to have peace in me, not in stuff. Because things in your life are always changing. It's what we can't control that creates the fear that wants to control you. And the only way, the only antidote, the only way I know of to overcome that fear is really seriously and honestly getting anchored in a relationship with Christ, trusting in the Lord with all of our heart, not leaning on our own understanding. Because you know what? There's a lot of stuff happening in the world today. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I can't control it, and I can't change it. So you know what my option is? To go right there for my source of peace and saying, God, even when the world is shaken, you are not. You are my source of hope. And I'll express to you my trust in you right now, today.